NellieBly broke barriers because she inspired a generation to change the world and improve women's rights by courageously standing up for the oppressed. Born May 5, 1864, Elizabeth Jane Cochrane, later known as NellieBly, was born into a masculine world. In the late 1800s, men were expected to work and earn money, while women were expected to serve their husbands by cleaning, cooking, and sewing. This was unfair because all people were supposed to be treated equally. NellieBly didn't like this mold and believed she could do anything a man could do. She broke the barrier of women's expectations and also changed people's views on what women could accomplish. Elizabeth's father was a successful man. Unfortunately, he died when Elizabeth was 6 years old. Her mother, Mary Jane, remarried into a horrible relationship 2 years later. Jack Ford was always drunk and very abusive to Mary Jane. After 5 years of suffering, Elizabeth's mother filed for divorce. Elizabeth testified against her stepfather. Elizabeth couldn't bear seeing her mother mistreated. She didn't want anyone to experience what she did. Ford has been generally drunk since they were married, said 14-year-old Elizabeth. When drunk, he is very cross. Ford threatened to do Mother harm. Mother was afraid of him. After Elizabeth realized that men aren't completely reliable, she went to the Indiana Normal School to become a teacher. At the end of Elizabeth's first term, she dropped out due to money problems. She then lived at home with her mother and her brother Albert, who provided for the family. Her brothers were a pharmacist and a banker in Pittsburgh, but Elizabeth couldn't find a good job. Elizabeth was much more educated, but she still didn't get a job. She was determined to find a way to earn a living so that she and her mother did not have to depend on men like Jack Ford. While in Pittsburgh, Elizabeth read a newspaper article called "What Girls Are Good For." By looking at that title, she knew it would be rude and offensive. After reading this article, she wrote a strongly worded letter to the editor of the paper using the alias Lonely Orphan Girl. To Elizabeth's surprise, she read in the following day's paper a favorable response from the editor that liked her letter. Elizabeth responded to this message and met the editor of the newspaper. George Madden, the editor, had wanted to hire Elizabeth since he had read her letter, and at the meeting he did. This is when she adopted her pen name, NellieBly. She started writing articles about female factory workers and how poorly they were treated. Those articles were not getting attention, and her editor wanted her to start writing about arts and fashion because she was a woman. This angered Nellie. She believed that women could do just as many things as men. In 1887, Bly moved to New York City. After talking to several other newspapers, Nellie met with representatives from the New York World newspaper, and they interviewed her. During the interview, Nellie met John A. Cockerell. She told Cockerell that she had an experience as an undercover journalist. He thought that even though she was a woman and had limited values, he would offer her a job. The first assignment Cockerell gave Nellie was to investigate alleged abuse and wrongdoings at the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell Island. Blackwell Island is on the East River right next to New York City. The island has a couple of buildings, including a prison, hospital, and an insane asylum. The New York World didn't want this to be a standard interview. They wanted Nellie to be very committed to the story. Cockerell wanted Nellie to pretend to be a patient at the lunatic asylum. He knew that the staff at the asylum would not be truthful if they were being interviewed. If Nellie pretended to be a patient, they would treat her like one. All of that just for one story. Nellie went to Matron Irene Stannard's temporary home for females and began acting strangely. She became forgetful, stared at the wall, and refused to sleep. This created suspicion around the home. The next day, Matron Irene called the local police and described Nellie Brown's odd behavior. They took her to the doctor, and he diagnosed her as positively demented. When Nellie arrived at the insane asylum on Blackwell Island, she realized that most of the women there were not insane. Many spoke different languages, or their husbands abandoned them and had them committed to Blackwell. The women were treated horribly and served with small meals of tasteless food, cold baths in dirty bathwater, and were treated by cruel doctors. Overall, it was a horrible experience for Nellie, and she had to tell the story. The New York World sent a lawyer to remove Nellie from the lunatic asylum. Once she was out, Nellie published a 2-part story about the horrific treatment of patients at Blackwell Island. This article was widely published in newspapers all across North America. New York's leaders sent Nellie and some investigators to the insane asylum a few weeks later. New York's leaders distributed more funds to the hospitals and asylums in New York. Upon returning, they found better conditions. Finally, Nellie knew that her dangerous work had paid off and that she had helped the people on Blackwell Island and all around New York. 1 year after Nellie's groundbreaking article, Nellie was working as a stunt reporter, and she was considering new story ideas. Inspired by the fictional character Phileas Fogg, She had the amazing idea to travel around the world in less than 80 days. Nellie pitched the idea to her editor, but he said no. He thought that a woman couldn't survive a trip so dangerous, but a man could. He also thought that a man could generate more revenue for the newspaper. Nellie was discouraged and dropped the idea. About a year later, Nellie brought the idea up again, and the editor again said no. Nellie threatened to do it for another newspaper, so the editor gave in. When Nellie departed on her journey, another female reporter left at the same time. Nellie's competitor was named Elizabeth Bisland, and both women wanted to prove that they could do anything a man could do. Nellie left New York on a boat called the Augusta Victoria, and a crowd of people were there to see her depart. News spread of Nellie's trip, even to different countries. People in New York were betting when NellieBly would return. On the boat, Nellie talked to the crew, and they recognized her as the woman traveling around the world. More and more people started talking about her and how she was trying to beat Phileas Fogg and Elizabeth Bisland in a race against time. People also liked that Nellie defied her boss and said that she could do it without a chaperone. Nellie traveled to a lot of places and inspired many people. She showed them that when you put your mind to something, you can accomplish it. It took Nellie 72 days, 6 hours, and 11 minutes to finish her trip. She beat Phileas Fogg, Elizabeth Bisland, and her own itinerary. After this huge stunt, Nellie was famous. She had her own board game and was known all across America as one of the people who helped women in America move forward. In conclusion, NellieBly broke barriers because she inspired a generation to change the world and improve women's rights by courageously standing up for the oppressed. Nellie showed the world that women could do anything that men could do. Her editor didn't want her to travel around the world because she was a woman, but Nellie did it in record time. Through her reporting, Nellie helped factory workers receive better pay. She went undercover and exposed the horrible conditions at hospitals and asylums. Nellie went on to cover stories on many issues, including a story on Susan B. Anthony and the women fighting for voting rights. NellieBly stood up for people and became famous because of all the brave and dangerous things she did as a journalist. Nellie had a huge influence on younger generations, and she inspired them to go out and get what they wanted.
Someone's gotta stand up and tell them what a girl is good for. We gotta speak up for the ones who've been told to shut up. Oh, Nellie, take us all around the world and break those rules, 'cause you're our girl. Oh, Nellie, take us all around the world with you. We wanna make something of ourselves too. Oh, Nellie, you show us just what you would do. Oh, Nellie, you show us just what